All right. So, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my slides because I actually have slides for this class. Okay. This is a workshop that I've taught multiple times. Generally, I give it every October for my meetup called GData. I also give it every year at the Women in Data Science Conference that happens in March. So I'm well versed in this particular workshop, and this workshop is going to be hands-on. I'm going to talk at you for just a little bit, and then I want everybody to actually put hands on keyboard because I think the best way to learn how to code is to do it yourself. So, Shiny is a package in R. Now, for those who came to last class, you know that a package in R is a supplementary set of code that somebody has written. That somebody could be someone from R, someone from RStudio, or an academic, or someone in industry, because R is open source. And so those packages all have some sort of function. Shiny allows you to create browser-based applications without knowing any JavaScript. And it allows you to use all of R's powerful programming on the back end. So you can do a bunch of amazing statistical analysis and display it interactively in a browser. And it's a really, really good way to showcase projects. I recommend every single one of my students, every single one of my colleagues to use Shiny to create, to showcase projects for going on interviews, because then all you have to do is send the person who's interviewing you a link, and they can click on the link and go to this browser-based application and explore all of the data analysis that you've already done. And it speaks for itself, the amount of coding and the amount of analysis that you've done. Okay, so Shiny has a couple different pieces. Now, in last class, we talked a little bit about the code in the top left corner of RStudio. That's where you can save files, code files that you have that don't run by themselves. You have to run them. So remember, we said that if you put code in the console, you can hit enter and it'll immediately run. If you put code up in that top left corner, you can save it as a .r file, and you can run that code all at once, or save it for later. That's where you can do a bunch of editing and stuff. So in Shiny, there are two different pieces to a Shiny. There is, and there are two different .r files generally. You can create a Shiny with one .r file that has both these two pieces in it, but I recommend not doing that. And this is the format we're going to follow today. So the server of our Shiny is the backend piece. That is where we create everything. That's where we do all of the data analysis. It's our backend for our application. And it's called server.r. Now, this file must be called server.r, or Shiny, the package, will not recognize it. So you can't call it server2 or server3. It must be called server.r. This has three different input parameters: input, output, and session. Now, input are all of the inputs from the user. And what I mean by the user is, I don't mean you, the programmer, I mean the person who is interacting with your Shiny. The output variable is all of the data that we want to send to our UI. Now the UI is, UI stands for user interface. So that's all the data that we want to send to the UI file. And that's the data that's going to get displayed to the user. And then the third input is optional. It's called session. And this records all the different information about the particular session that's open, like IP addresses and stuff. But I generally do not use session unless I absolutely need to know who is using what Shiny. But generally I leave out session. And for the example today, we're just going to use input and output. The second part of the Shiny app is the UI. Now this is another file. It's called ui.r, and it must be called ui.r or Shiny will not recognize it. The way the Shiny package works is it sees both of these files. It knows they both have to work together to create the Shiny. So like I said, both of these files have to be named specific things. And I'll show you that in a minute. Now, we're going to be using a style package for Shiny called Shiny Dashboard. You don't have to use Shiny Dashboard, and I'm going to show you why in a second. But Shiny Dashboard is awesome because it just makes your Shiny really pretty. It makes it look like a dashboard. And the Shiny Dashboard has 3 different parts in and of itself. It has a header, a sidebar, and a body. Now, a lot of websites now are built this way with a header, a sidebar, and a body. And so it's going to be super recognizable when you see it. Now, the header has a bunch of different things that we can add to it, like a title, message items, notification items, and task items. We're going to work with a title, but we're not going to work with any of the other extras today. The sidebar has both menu items and sub-menu items. We are going to work with menu items and not sub-menu items today unless time allows. And then the body has a bunch of different things. You can use, so there's a function called tab items that we're going to use today. We're going to use tab item because that goes inside of tab items. We're going to use the box function. I generally, I have, unless I want to do a really, really fancy Shiny, I don't use info box, but info box is also really cool. There's a tab box and a value box that I generally don't use, which we may or may not get into today. What we're going to do today after I go through the slides is we're just going to play with Shiny and do some like coding on the fly, which if you remember from last class, coding on the fly is a little dangerous, but I like to live dangerously. I still have everybody? I still have a Skia, at least. Have I lost everybody else? Okay, cool. All right, so the UI has a bunch of different functions that you can use for displaying things and getting input from your user. One of them being widgets. There are lots of different types of inputs that we're going to explore today. Then there are buttons and conditional panels. We are not going to do conditional panels in our UI, but that is a possibility. And I'm going to show you how to get to the documentation so you can explore all of this on your own. There are outputs for our UI. Each of our functions for our UI allow us to output a bunch of different things to the user, what gets displayed. So we have an HTML output, a text output, a verbatim output, an image output, a plot output, a UI output, a table output, and a text output. Oh, sorry, I put text in there twice. But any of these so I got a question. Do I need to start project in Shiny or do I write it in R? And then, so what will happen is we're going to open up our studio. We're going to install the packages that we need for Shiny. And Shiny is just a type of document in R. Now, once you have installed the Shiny package. And I'm going to walk you through all of that. I'm just giving you like a heads up on these are all the different options that we have before we start actually doing it. Cool. Okay, so we have a bunch of different possibilities for outputs. We have HTML tags that we can use for people who have written HTML. H1 through H6 are the different types of headers, and they all display differently. But they're all functions that we can use for displaying in our UI. Now, for the server file, we have a bunch of different types of things that we can use as well. We have reactive variables, which we are not going to use today, I don't think, but they are they react to things based on the input from the user. We have rendering, and the rendering stuff we are going to use today. We're going to do some plotting. We might do some images. We're going to add a table of data, and we're going to probably put some text into our Shiny. And then in the server, you can add any code that you would do in R. So I've done a bunch of network analysis on the back end inside a server for a Shiny. I've done statistical analysis, which we're going to do some of that today, some basic statistical analysis. I've done basically anything that you can do in R, you can put in your server. But any type of code that we would want to write that's going to calculate things, that is definitely going to go in our server and not in our UI. Okay, so remember I said I was only going to talk at you for a little bit. So now it's time to play. Okay, so I'm going to open up our studio. Now this should look very similar to what happened last time. I'm going to clear out my environment so I have nothing there. And remember, we have this field right here on the top left where we can save different files. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install Shiny Dashboard. Now remember, you can install packages 2 different ways. You can type in install packages and put Shiny in quotes. Or you can go to the packages tab, click install, and type it into the box. I am just going to use the install.packages function. Cool. Everybody have Shiny Dashboard or Shiny installed now? Awesome. So the next package we're going to install is Shiny Dashboard. And that doesn't take long at all. Because Shiny Dashboard is just a way to make your Shiny look pretty rather than adding a bunch of different capabilities. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we want to load in these 2 libraries. And to do that, we can do one of 2 things. We can use that library command and type in the name of the package we want to load. And the awesome thing about RStudio is that when you start typing in the name of the package, it will automatically give you choices for an autocomplete. As you can see, when I load in Shiny Dashboard, an object is masked from the package graphics. So what this means is there is the graphics package, the base graphics package in R has a function that is called box. We are now going to be using the function called box in Shiny Dashboard instead. So we're not going to be able to use the one inside the graphics package. I don't think I've ever used the one inside the graphics package in base R, so that's really not that big a deal. Okay, so the next thing we want to do, everybody's installed and loaded Shiny and Shiny Dashboard, right? No. Okay, we'll wait. Well, you can always hit the install button and type it here instead. Oof. Got it. I forget that I have really, really fancy internet. Well, and I also already had Shiny installed, so probably didn't have to like do a whole lot when I installed it. Okay, well, just put a note in the chat when it is finished installing. I'm give it a minute. Yes. Sorry, Leland, I forgot to ask if it was okay with you if I recorded. Yes, the other workshop was recorded and it's on YouTube, and I can give you the link if you like. But you can also just look for Veronica Red on YouTube and you'll find it. I think it's the only video that I have posted on YouTube at the moment. Oh my. Oh goodness. Well, it's obvious why I like this particular package. Yes, as soon as you finish installing it, it should show in your package list. See how mine is shown here? If you use after you use the library command, the checkbox should show as checked. You can also just click the checkbox and it will run the library command as well. Glenn, is it still installing? I don't want to go forward until everybody has it installed and loaded because I want people to be able to follow along. Okay, all right. Askia, do you have everything loaded now? Glenn, you're running everything on Linux, aren't you? That might be a problem. I've never run Shiny on Linux, so that's something Askia, if you want to send me like some screenshots via email, I can look into what's happening. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and move forward and like check out, oh. If you're on Windows, you may have to open up RStudio. Oh, yeah, no, that would cause the problem if you're not, and it has to install from the internet. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and, okay. All right, so to create a shiny, all you have to do is go up to this little down arrow right next to the plus, the like piece of paper with a plus on it. And you can see this drop down menu. And Shiny Web App is one of the options. So we're going to click that. Now you have two different options here for application type. I'm going to say click multiple file, please. And then we are going to create an application. I'm going to call it pandemic because this is what's happening right now. And then you want to tell it where to put it. So what's going to happen for your Shiny, it's going to create a base Shiny, but what it's going to do is it's going to create a folder with the name of your Shiny and put the two files that you need in it, the UI.R and the server.R. So when I hit create, it now opens a UI.R and a server.R file. Now the cool thing about this is that this is a working Shiny. So all you have to do is click Run App, and you get to see exactly some of the capabilities of Shiny. So this particular one simply displays a histogram and allows the user to change the number of bins. Now, remember, a histogram has to do with, everybody know what a histogram is? Well, either way, a histogram shows you the distribution of your data, which with each of the bins being one of these bars. So we can change the number of bins, and it changes the number of bars. And the height of the bar is how many of that particular value or that particular set of values is in your data. So you can see that basically this like 52 to 54 or something has around 16 values in it, for example. And you can also play with this, changing the width of the bars, changes how many values are in there because it's based on the specific data that we're looking at. This particular data set is the Old Faithful Geyser data. Remember, last class, I talked about how there was a ton of data already in R, built in. One of them is the Old Faithful Geyser data set. And we're gonna play with this Old Faithful Geyser data set today. So again, this is a base Shiny. You can also open it in a browser, and this is what it would look like in a browser. Cool. Base Shiny. Now what you're gonna wanna do is make sure after you've run your Shiny, you close it, because now we're gonna make some edits. Because what's happening here when you run your Shiny app is it opens a local port, a local HTTP port to listen on and show your browser-based application. Okay, so I'm gonna walk a little bit through each of these two different files, the UI file and the server file. So the UI file, remember, is the file that has all of the things that are being displayed to the user. So this particular file is loading the library Shiny. It's then creating a fluid page, which we are actually going to get rid of that and use Shiny Dashboard instead. But it's showing the title panel, and the type of layout is a sidebar layout for this particular one. It puts in a slider input in that sidebar panel, and that slider is where we chose the number of bins. And then the main panel is where that plot showed, that histogram plot that we were playing with, right? Now, this is all just display and user input. This doesn't actually do any of the data analysis, and it doesn't use the input from the user. Now, this slider input has that one first parameter that comes into it is bins, and that's a string. But that bins string tells the server how to access the data from that slider. And now let me show you how that happens. So remember, with our server, we had those three parameters to input, possibly an input, output, and session. Now in this particular server, we're only going to use input and output. But you can see for our output, we're putting inside our output parameter displot. So for people who were at last class, I believe I talked about data frames last class. And so one of the ways to access things inside a data frame is to use that $sign and then the name of the variable inside the data frame. That's the same way we're going to deal with our inputs and our outputs. So our outputs that we create in our Shiny server are what we're going to then be able to use in our UI.R. And then our inputs that we create in our UI.R are going to come in to our Shiny server. So we're creating a distribution plot using a render plot command. We're going to pull the faithful data that's already built into R. It's already there. We're creating a vector from bins, or called bins, from X, which is our old faithful data. And we're looking at the minimum of our old faithful data, the maximum of our old faithful data, and then we use the input variable and the variable inside the input variable called bins, remember, from our slider, to help to create this vector bins inside of our server, to then put inside our histogram command. So we're drawing a histogram with a specified number of bins. The specified number of bins is from the user, from the slider. So we pull in the variable X, which has all of our data from Old Faithful. We tell it the number of breaks or the number of bars, the number of bins that we've created. And then we give it the color that we want and what color border we want. And it creates this histogram graph, which we then send out into our output variable to use in our UI. So you can see the plot output is this string dist plot. Now that dist plot has to exactly match the output that we created here, the output variable we created here. Just like the bins string here has to match that input $ variable here. Okay, so now we're going to take our UI and change it from a basic Shiny to a Shiny dashboard Shiny. Askia, did you ever get your things installed? Fabulous. Shiny dashboard should be super quick. Leland, were you able to follow along by running the app and everything? Cool. Glenn, did you ever figure out what was happening? No? I don't know. I haven't heard from you, Glenn, so. I gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that Linux was gonna. I've taught this for Mac and for PC a bunch, and I didn't realize that Linux was gonna make things sad. Sorry about that. I know that for next time. Okay, so we're gonna go into our UI, and we're gonna change it to a Shiny dashboard Shiny. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load Shiny dashboard into the workspace of my Shiny. Now, I haven't talked about this yet, but each of the .r functions or .r files here have their own workspace. So they generally cannot use things that are in your global environment. You have to create everything that you need for each of your files inside the file. Which means that if you need a particular library or a particular package you need to create it there. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to create the outline of what a Shiny dashboard page looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Shiny dashboard documentation. And you can see if you do the question mark Shiny dashboard dash package, you get nothing. So instead, I'm going to go into the index. Now, if you click index after looking up the help for a particular package, you get to see all the different functions within that particular package. The first thing, if you remember correctly, when I create a Shiny dashboard page, I need to create a page just like I'm creating a page using Fluid Page here. So I'm going to click Shiny dashboard page. Now you can see that dashboard page takes in 3 different pieces: a header, a sidebar, and a body. It can also take in a title and a skin color. You can also see examples of how to run your your Shiny dashboard page if you were doing a single file Shiny. We are doing a 2-file Shiny, so we're going to do it a little bit different. So I'm going to go inside the Shiny UI function here. I'm going to hit enter a bunch, because we're going to take everything that was inside our Fluid page and we're going to use it inside this new Shiny. So I'm going to hit enter a bunch so I have it all the way down here. And then I'm going to put a closed parentheses here for that Shiny UI. And I'm going to start by creating a dashboard page. And add a bunch of returns in the middle, so I got lots of space. Now remember, the dashboard page has to have 3 different pieces. It has a dashboard header, a dashboard sidebar, I forgot. When you create your Shiny, you need to go up to the little down arrow next to the plus sign on the piece of paper, and it'll say Shiny Web App. You need to name it something, click the radio button multiple file, and then create. And it should open up two files, a UI.r and a server.r. Okay. So is everybody here, well, except for Glenn, I think, but is everybody else who is following along here at this place putting in the dashboard page and dashboard header and dashboard sidebar? So nobody is here. So for each line, so the question I had was, for each line, does the comma indicate a line break? It does not indicate a line break. If I hit enter, so a dashboard page is a function. It takes in 3 inputs: a header, a sidebar, and a body. So the commas are indicating the next parameter. I'm just hitting enter so that I have a lot of space. and everything is really clear as to where everything is. So I could just list them all three here. I'm doing inners, or I'm doing carriage returns so that it's easier to see. Our studio nicely tabs over when you're inside a function to remind you that you're inside a function. So Shiny UI is a function, dashboard page is a function, and each one of these would also be a function. For functions, we use the name of the function and then open and close parentheses. Cool. Okay, so Leela and Askia, are you inside your UI.R? Cool. Excellent. Okay, so inside our dashboard page, we've got three different pieces. We've got the header, the sidebar, and the body. Now, we've given it a bunch of blank stuff. And I'm gonna add a title. This is what's gonna display at the top of the browser when you open up your Shiny. I'm gonna call it Old Faithful. You can call it anything you like. This is just a string that's going to display at the top of the browser. And I'm also going to add the parameter skin. I want my Shiny to be purple. So I changed my skin color to purple. The default skin color is blue. And you can change it to a bunch of different possibilities within dashboard page. Got blue, black, purple, green, red, or yellow. Okay, so we've created our dashboard page, but it doesn't really have anything in it right now. So the first thing we need to do is we need to put something in our header. Now I'm gonna go to the documentation over here on this bottom right, click on dashboard header. And you can see it gives you an example of how to use dashboard header. Now the only thing that I'm going to fill in my dashboard header is the title because I'm not going to use the drop-down menu section. This is a very, very complicated header. Okay, so I'm just gonna put title. And I'm gonna call it Old Faithful Analysis. That's all I'm gonna add to my header. My header is gonna be very simple. I'm just gonna add the title, that's it. Now the other two pieces of the dashboard page are a little bit more complicated, the sidebar and the body. And the sidebar and the body, they work together really well. They each have to call on things to each other. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to the dashboard page, and click on dashboard sidebar here. We could also type in a question mark here and do dashboard sidebar. and we get our documentation. So in R, if you need any documentation about a particular function, all you have to do is type in question mark and the name of the function, and it'll automatically pull up your documentation. Okay, so now that you've got Shiny and Shiny Dashboard installed, Glenn, you need to open up, click that little button and open it. Okay, fine. All right. So for our dashboard sidebar, we need a couple different things. We need a sidebar menu, and we need menu items. So I'm going to add some carriage returns in here so I have some space. And I'm going to go ahead and do my sidebar menu. And I'm going to add one menu item because right now I'm just going to create one tab for my dashboard. On menu item, you have to give it a couple of different inputs. You need to give it a name, like a title that's going to show. So I'm going to call this first one histogram, because I'm just going to display that histogram and the slider on this tab. And then the next input is the tab name. Now, if you remember, I had to have the name for our bins input had to correspond directly with the input $bins that we used in our server. Well, sidebar menu and our sidebar page and a dashboard sidebar and our dashboard body work together in this way that the tab names in our sidebar will correspond to the tabs that we're going to fill out in our body. And because I'm a lazy data scientist, I like my names of things to be very short. But I also want them to actually correspond to, or actually tell me what it is I'm creating. So I'm going to put my tab name as hist, because I'll know that means that I'm creating a histogram in this tab. Now, since I only want one tab, that is all I need. Now, I could also add an icon for my menu item. I'm not going to, but I could. And we could always add that later. We'll try to do this one as simple as possible for the first one. Now that we finished our sidebar, we need to work on our dashboard body. Now, if you look at the documentation here for our sidebar menu here, this one is pretty complicated, but they added a menu item dashboard and a tab name dashboard. So we go down to our dashboard body, we have to have tab items that correspond with our menu items. So in dashboard body, I'm going to put in tab items. The tab items command is basically the command that corresponds with the sidebar menu command. And then each tab item will correspond to a menu item or a menu sub item. So you can see that some of our tabs above have like sub items, which we'll play with in a minute. We're just going to do one menu item for now. But inside our tab items, we need one tab item. And this tab item is going to correspond to our histogram. Now, the first input into our tab item is the tab name that we're that we're filling. So that name has to correspond to the tab name that we gave the menu item, or it will not fill. Now, I also need to put in what we're going to put into our tab. So I'm going to go down here to this slider input bit, make sure I've got the whole thing, all the way down to this parentheses with the value equals 30. I'm going to copy it. And go back up here to my tab item and paste it there. And put a comma. So what I've just done is I've told Shiny that in this tab, I want to put that slider. And I put a comma there, so now I can put other things in that tab. So I'm going to go back down to the bottom where the plot is, the plot output. I'm going to copy it. And put it here. So I've now told Shiny that in this tab, the hist tab, I've put my slider input and my plot output. Now I can delete all of that. And I need to add one more parentheses to close out my Shiny UI. Okay, so if you don't have enough parentheses, you'll end up seeing like a little red X next to a line. That'll tell you that you didn't close out the parentheses like you were supposed to. Now, I'm gonna save this. And then I'm gonna click Run App. Is everybody with me? Everybody have like the slider input put in and the plot output and made sure to close all the parentheses and stuff for the UI? Or everybody who was following along? So the exit line 15 means you didn't close out dashboard page. So you need to put an extra parentheses there. Extra parentheses at the bottom. Well, we'll know if we got it if we run app and nothing bad happens. It looks like you might need to add. Okay. I've got Shiny UI. I've got my dashboard page. I put in a dashboard header, and I made sure that was closed with parentheses, and I have a comma. Then I've got my dashboard sidebar, open parentheses, my sidebar menu, open parentheses, and my menu item. And see when I put my cursor right next to the parentheses, it shows me the closing parentheses. And then sidebar menu. And then dashboard body, tab items, tab item. And that will close the body. And then my title and my skin. And I close my page and my Shiny UI. All right, let's click Run App and see what happens. Ta-da! So now we have our histogram. We have a tab called histogram. We have a nice little hamburger button up here. Watch what happens when I hit the hamburger button. My sidebar goes away. Just like what happens on a lot of websites now when you hit that little hamburger button. And yes, I call it a hamburger button. You can also move the slider just like before, but now we have this fancy like purple outline on the outside. Well, I made mine purple. You could have made yours any color or any of the color choices that they have for dashboard, Shiny dashboard. Is everybody able to get this? Cool. Askia? Excellent. Okay. Very cool. Alrighty, so let's play with this then. So now we have like a base Shiny dashboard. Let's add some more stuff to it. What should we add? More menu items, okay. If we add more menu items, we will need another tab, right? So if we add another menu item, it's another tab. What do we want to put on our other tab? A scatter plot. That sounds awesome. Let's do that. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure we close our Shiny because you can't run your Shiny again if it's still open. X out of it and make sure we have a blinking cursor down here in our console. Okay, so the first thing we need to do if we're gonna create another tab is we need to create another tab in our UI. So we've got our menu item histogram. We're gonna put a comma here and add a second menu item. I'm gonna call it scatter plot or have that be the thing displayed. And then I need to give it a tab name. I'm gonna call it scatter. Okay, now all this did was add another tab to our Shiny, but it didn't put anything in it. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go down to our dashboard body, and after that first tab item, put a comma, add another tab item. And remember, our tab name was scatter. Now, I'm gonna leave this here because we haven't actually created a scatter plot to put in it, right? So I'm gonna save this and I'm gonna go to my server. So if we wanna create a scatter plot, we need to create another plot in our output. So we have this one render plot section. So after that, I'm going to create another one. Output. And remember, we want to put it inside our output. So I'm going to say output $, scatter. I'm going to set it equal to my render plot function. Which in all of our rendering functions in Shiny, we have to have both the parentheses and the curly brackets. Because what's happening is our render plot is taking in an expression and changing it to JavaScript. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to look at faithful. So I'm going to go down to my console. And get faithful to show up. Now faithful is a data frame with two different columns. One is eruptions and one is waiting. So the second column is waiting, and that is the one that we have put in our histogram. I'm going to create a scatter plot where our X variable is waiting and our Y variable is the eruptions. So the only thing I need to do is I just need to type in plot. Oh, sorry. I'm using Python syntax. This is the problem with coding on the fly. I was using Python syntax and not our syntax. To get the full column of a data frame, you can either call the column by its name, or you can put in the index of the column. So remember I said I was going to use waiting as my X variable. So I put (2) because the second column is waiting. And I'm going to use eruptions as my Y variable. So I put (1) here. And because I want scatter plots, I'm going to say type equals P. P for point. Now this is a super, super simple scatter plot. I want to also add some labels to it. So let's put a title on it. And in R, if you want to put a title in your plot, you use the main command or the main parameter, because that's the main title. I'm going to say eruptions versus waiting time as my title, because that's what I've plotted. I'm going to use an X label. So remember, our X was our waiting time. And I'm going to use a Y label. Eruptions. Yes, okay. Cool. So we've added a scatter plot. We've told it that we want our main title to be eruptions versus waiting time. Oh. And our X label is waiting time, and our Y label is eruptions. Cool? Still got everybody? You with us, Askia? Cool. Glenn, following along okay? Awesome. Okay. So now we've created our plot, but what did we forget to do? Anybody know what we forgot? Exactly, Leland. Link it in the UI. So we've not told the UI to display this scatter plot yet. So we're going to go back to our UI and we're going to use plot output. And remember, we have to put in the ID. We called it scatter. Now let's see if we did it right. So it automatically comes up on our histogram tab. But look, there's another tab, scatter plot. And if we click it, look, we have a fun little scatter plot. Now, I think the scatter plot is kind of boring. And I also think the histogram is kind of boring. Let's add some color. And not just add color, let's get the user to add the color. How's that sound? Awesome. So I'm gonna get out of my Shiny. Did everybody's Shiny show up like this and we got no errors? So Askia, do you also have the tab that says scatterplot? Click on that tab, please. Do you have a scatterplot there? Nothing. Okay. So if you X out of your, you might have errors listed in your console. And that might tell you what's happening. It's also possible you misspelled something, because spelling is the error that I get all the time in coding. So if you go back to your server and make sure that you spelled this output correctly and scatter correctly when you rendered your plot, and the plot output has that capital O. Did you figure out how to fix it, Askia? That's a really good question, Leland. There isn't that I know of. I got this same question in my Shiny workshop in March, and I looked into it, and Shiny doesn't have an accessibility checker. It does, however, in R, you have lots of different color color sets, including like colorblind color sets, which is generally what I use when I'm trying to do but also Askia, your UI looks like this, right? And you made sure that the tab name here, scatter, matches this tab name in the menu item. Okay. And in server, your output $ scatter definitely has like an end to your render plot and everything, right? Oh, cool. Excellent. Yes. Case R is case sensitive, unfortunately. So if you have an uppercase versus a lowercase, it's gonna mess with things. So I always do everything in lowercase. The functions in Shiny are all camel case, which means that like the first letter of the function is always lowercase, or the first letter of the first word of the function is always lowercase, and the first letter of the second word is always uppercase. Okay, so now let's play with some color. Now I want to put an input for color in both of the tabs. So what I'm going to do is right after my slider input and after that comma, I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to create a select input. And put a comma right after it so I don't forget. Now, a select input in Shiny is a drop-down menu. Now, if we go inside the parentheses and hit tab, oh, no. I'm going to call my select input colors, and I'm going to call it colors 1, so that when I go to create my list of colors or use my list of colors in my server, I know which set of colors I'm looking at. So my first select input is going to be colors 1. Now we've already put in our input ID, that's colors 1. We need to create a label. So the label is what shows up to your user. I generally use my labels as instructions so that my user knows what to do. And then we also need our choices. Now in R, if you want to create a vector, you use this lowercase c and open and close parentheses. So I'm going to add a couple of colors here. I'm going to say pink, purple, green, red, blue. R nicely recognizes the names of colors as colors. So we're gonna use that to our advantage. So we got pink, purple, green, red, blue. I'm gonna do an orange. Any other colors? Okay. Magenta, all right. We know who was a Rocky Horror fan. Okay, so now we have this drop-down menu of colors. And I'm just gonna save it. And I'm gonna run my app because I wanna see what happened. Now, in that first tab, we've got that number of bends slider. We've got our colors that we can select, but it doesn't do anything, right? Why not? We didn't link it to the server. That's correct. And everybody got that right. Good job. So let's X out of our Shiny and go back to our server. Now this color is specifically for our histogram, right? And in our histogram, to change the color, we use that COL parameter. So we're gonna delete that dark gray, and we're gonna type in input $, and when you start the input $, you can see that there were two different inputs available in our Shiny. One of them is bins, and one of them is colors. We're gonna select colors 1. Now I'm gonna save this, and you can run your app from either the server or the UI. So I'm gonna hit the run app button. And now you can see that the default selected color has now colored the histogram. Let's see if we can change that. Ta-da! Yes, that is more of a chartreuse than a dark green for sure. But so now we've changed the color for our histogram, but we wanted to also do it for our scatter plot, right? Because our scatter plot looks kind of sad. So let's exit out of our Shiny and go into our UI. And I'm gonna take my select input. I'm just gonna copy the whole thing, including the comma at the end. And go into my tab item with my scatter, paste it, and change it to colors 2. Because I want it to be 2 different inputs, right? So I'm gonna save this. And I'm gonna go to my server. And what I need to do is put in a color parameter for my scatter plot, right? And now when I type in input $, so I get a question that if we left it at color as colors one, would changing one automatically change the other in the shiny? It might. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it just works on you. It causes unstable behavior, unfortunately. If we had left the select input as colors one in the two different tabs. If we had just left the one select input there and used colors one in our scatter plot, then both of them would be the same color, no matter what we changed it to, and no matter what tab we were on. I'm going to pull up colors too. Now, I'm not 100% sure that COL is the color parameter for plot. So we may get no color change. But I'm going to try it anyway. So we go to oh, it is. It's the right one. Sometimes I write in COL, sometimes I write in color, and like it doesn't always, I don't always remember exactly which of the what the parameter is called. So now we have a select input for our scatter plot color. We still have the same select input that we had before on our histogram. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to clean this up a little bit. We have a number of bins, we have a color, we have a histogram, we have a scatter plot with a select input here, but this looks kind of messy. I'm going to use the box command. So I'm going to exit out of this and go into my UI. And I'm going to put a box around each one of my things in my tab items. Making sure to close out my parentheses on each one of them. Now the box puts this nice little bounding box on each one of the things, so it looks much cleaner in the dashboard. Thank you for coming to class, Leland. The rest of class is going to be recorded, and I'm going to put it up on YouTube whenever we stop. So you can watch the rest of whatever you've missed at that point in time. Okay. So then I want to run my app because now I've cleaned it up with my boxes. And now you can see everything is in its nice little box. And they all look like they belong. Do we want to add any more options to our shiny? I think Askia, it's up to you because I'm not I don't know if Glenn got to this point with making the shiny. Okay. Okay, well, I would like to show you how to create an input in your server. So I'm going to take our select inputs of colors, and I'm going to make that in my server instead, because I want to do some fancy coding with taking all of the possible colors in R and creating a random sample. So I'm going to X out of this. Now you see how we outputted all of our plots by using plot output, right? What we're going to do instead is we're going to, well, instead of using this select input here, we're going to use a UI output, because we're going to create UI code in our server. So I'm going to take the name that I created for my first select input and put it here. And create a render UI function. Now I'm going to go back to my UI and take my select input code that's inside the box, and I'm going to cut it and paste it here. And if we wanted things to work exactly the same, all we have to do is type in UI output and colors 1. The the render UI that we created here is going to work exactly the same now, except for we're creating it in our server and passing it to our UI. So when we ran our app, it still looks exactly the same. Still has the same functionality. It's exactly the same. But the reason that I moved it is because I wanted to be able to create a long vector of colors and use a random sample of those colors for my select input. Now, the nice thing about R is that it already has a long list of all the colors in R. You can just type in colors and open and close parentheses, and it gives you 657 colors. Those are all of the colors in R. Now, we don't want a drop-down menu with 657 choices. But what I want is a random sample of those choices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a vector called calls, and I'm going to use the sample command, if I can spell. And in sample, we need a vector to sample. So our vector is going to be colors. And we need the number of items to choose. So I'm going to tell it I want 12 options. So calls is now a random sample of 12 colors from the 657. Now the last thing we have to do is replace our choices here with the variable calls. So in our select input, we have our name, our label, and the choices is now that vector of 12 colors that are randomly sampled from the set of colors. So I'm going to save it. And let's see what the list of colors is now. So gray 12 was definitely not one of the ones that we had listed before. There's deep pink. There's pale turquoise, pale turquoise 4. There's chocolate 1, which actually looks a lot like an orange. Seashell 4. Bisque 1. Azure 3. Lawn green. Green 3. And dark orange 1. Now we can do exactly the same thing for the other drop-down menu, the one we have in the scatter plot, or we can leave the scatter plot just the way it is. I like the fun random colors, because as soon as I X out of my shiny and start it again, there's a whole nother list of 12 colors. Because it does that code every single time you run your shiny. It recalculates that vector of random sample. All right, well, I think I've given you plenty of things to think about for today. So I think I'm going to end here. Are there any questions at the moment? Okay. Well, if there are no questions, I'm going to sign off, and I will post the recording on YouTube as soon as it's finished. I also will, I believe I have an email address for both of you. I will email you the Shiny folder that I created so that you have all of the code that I wrote, or that we wrote together in class. Cool. Well, have a great Friday, and thank you for coming to class. Oh, and for next week, we are doing Introduction to Python. So if you would like to learn Python, that's what we're doing next week.